Supervisor Gary, are you doing audio track with us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you.
We can hear you.
Mr. Belita? My wife talking.
Morning. Guess I can hear you.
Good morning. Thank you.
Kids. Now start our meeting to order. Can we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Alcorn?
Present.
Ms. Bagley? Ms. Bailey?
Present.
Ms. Bomke? Present. Ms. Franklin?
Present.
Ms. Gary?
Present.
Ms. Garvey? Ms. Hayes?
Here.
Mr. Kelly?
Here.
Ms. Lawson? Here. Mr. McLaughlin?
He's walking up.
Ms. Thank you. Ms. Mensing?
Here.
Mr. Smith?
Here.
Mr. Stark?
Present.
Mr. Walkinshaw?
Here.
And Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Okay. Ms. Garvey has requested to participate remotely.
Gary.
Oh, Ms. Gary has requested to participate remotely due to illness. Is there a motion?
Second.
Moved by Ms. Bonke, seconded by Supervisor Bailey. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Now move into our safety moment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just some quick assignments here. For 911, primary and secondary, let's go with Alex in the back would be our primary 911 caller. Secondary would be Karen in the back as well. For AED, CPR, Joe will be our primary in the back. Cindy will be our alternate. I will ask Dallas if we do summon first responders, if you could go down and communicate with the security guard, help filter them up to this room. That would be appreciated. I'll note too, I typically point to the evacuation route signs and stuff like that, but Bob and his team has been doing some maintenance in this building, and they just freshly or repainted the walls here within the last couple of days. So just as a reminder for evacuation routes, our primary evacuation route will be through the double wood doors to the elevator bank stairwell. We won't take the elevator bank. And that'll get us down to the first floor, and then we'll evacuate out that way. And then our alternate will be through the single wooden door here, all the way down to the end of the hallway there. There's a set of stairs that'll take us down. The pathfinders are still up. It's just the actual route map. So still, we've all walked it. They're safe evacuation routes. But again, just a little state of good repair being done in the building, which I'm sure is all appreciated. That's my safety moment, Madam Chair.
All right, we'll now move into approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any amendments to the agenda? Is there a motion? Moved by Mr. Kelly, seconded by Supervisor Bailey. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We'll now move into approval of the minutes from November 18th board meeting. Does anyone have any corrections or amendments? Is there a motion?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Moved by Supervisor Bailey. Is there a second? By Mr. Kelly. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, now move into chair's comment. Welcome to the December 2022 VRE Ops Board meeting. Just a quick reminder that we are live streaming this meeting, and there are microphones throughout the room, so please keep side conversations to a minimum. I just also want to point out that our own Ms. Libby Garvey received the Elizabeth and David Shull Metropolitan Public Service Award from COG. So let's all give it up for today, but wanted to definitely recognize her. This is the last meeting of the year. In January, I will take a few minutes to talk about all that we've accomplished in 2022 and welcome the incoming chair and other officers. But I also want to say thank you for all that you've done and all the hard work that we've put in this year. Have a lot of challenges, but I think we are making our way forward. And so we'll talk more about that in January. We do have some important items to consider for today. So we'll get right into it, and I'll turn it over to Rich for the CEO report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. always start my report with safety, but bear with me. I'd like to skip towards the end of the presentation to hit hit a very important safety topic. So we'll just keep moving through. On-time performance, we did see an uptick from the month of October. This is November's information, and a slight uptick even compared to September. As you can tell, our system-wide on-time performance did slip down in October to the high 70s. We're back up in almost to the mid 80s. And this real quick, just some of the, of course, congestion, albeit not as many occurrences, but still the primary occurrence out there for us. With a couple other things weaved in, albeit it was only 2, but this November's, we also see, and actually in this month, we didn't see that many occurrences, but we do see the effects of leaf oil out on the railroad during this time, but we only had a couple of occurrences of that. Ridership, with comparatively speaking, with fewer service days, we're starting into the seasonality of our ridership. It drops off typically in November and December and starts to pick up. But from an average daily ridership, still relatively comparative. Again, with 1 fewer service day in October, still almost in that 6,000 average daily ridership mark. One of our largest community relations type event came back this year. Santa Trains, I just want to bring up, we held Santa Trains on December 10th, last Saturday. Once again, a very popular event, and it's worth noting, you'll see a lot of folks here, a lot of Santas, a lot of Mrs. Claus. This is a all hands effort by VRE staff, but the community as well. We get a lot of volunteers in these different positions, including board members who graciously participated as one of the characters. But I just want to, I'm just going to do this, and I'm going to point to this one. I mean, that's what it's all about right there. If you could look at the face of that young man, it says it all. And I'll thank Supervisor Lawson for sharing that photo with us. But a very good event, a very safe event, and other than just little chilly weather, if you will, in the morning, we avoided rain, we avoided snow. So glad to be back. Not just the staff level, but the community, the region, glad to have that service back. For the, I dare say it's for the youngsters, but I got to tell you, it's just as much for the adults as it is the youngsters as well. And it was good seeing a lot of you out there. Supervisor Walkinshaw, Councilmember Mensing, a lot of you were out there as well to support this effort. So back to safety, I did want to highlight here one of the collaborative events for Santa Trains is there's a safety element to it in partnership with Operation Lifesaver, and of course one of the very anticipated elements of that are these coloring books, and albeit it just happened to turn out that way. No, I'm not necessarily highlighting the person in the outfit, albeit I think it becomes pretty predominant who that is. But in this case, this is our finance and accounting team, Mark and Kadra, supporting the distribution of the coloring books to children, and in some cases, I saw a lot of adults walk off with the coloring books as well. I had an opportunity. Mike and I were at an event a couple nights ago, and the director of Operation Lifesaver was there, and she even noted and thanked us for our efforts in really getting to the youngsters out there in terms of rail safety and stuff like that. Hopefully, we can build that rapport with the younger generations, and just frankly letting them know that stay off the tracks, be respectable of the rail environment. So anyway, great event. Glad to have done it again. and look forward to next year as well. Another major element of Santa Trains is also our Toys for Tots push. So we do this in multiple phases. We had a couple of onboard Toys for Tots collections during our normal service day, and then of course this event as well. Of course, the program is still going for this year with the Marines, but we like to get back to, we have been known as the largest contributor within the region for the Toys for Tots, drive, if you will, over years past, and like to think that if you're going to be the best at something, this is really obviously a good thing to be the best at. So had full support from the Marines, and if you see the picture to the left, contrary to reality, albeit those two gentlemen look really, they look like they could be brothers. This was the first time they'd ever met each other, so it's pretty phenomenal. We do have, I don't know if Dogwami showed up. Is he back there? Okay. We're going to skip this and we'll introduce new staff to you next month. Yeah, that's it, Madam Chair. That's the end of my report, my comments.
Good. Any questions for Mr. Dalton? I must say, I think Mr. Schofield's outfit was quite impressive. So thanks to all the staff that came out to the Santa Trains. And I think Supervisor Bodie also brought his family out. And so thank you for everyone who came out to support. So, all right, we will now move into item 8, public comment time. VRE accepts public comments both in person and electronically via the VRE website. Members of the public wishing to make public comments have 3 minutes and should state their full name and the jurisdiction they live in. And written comments submitted before 8 a.m. this morning will be forwarded to the members of the board, read into the minutes, and attached to the official minutes. Do we have any members of the public here who would like to address the board? And Madam Clerk, do we have any electronically submitted comments?
No, Madam Chair, we do not.
All right, we will now move into our action items. First, starting with 9A, referral of the amended FY 2023 and the recommended FY 2024 VRE ops and capital budgets for the commissions and jurisdiction. Mr. Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we Mark gets positioned here, we do have some slides. We do have a presentation here, but I just want to start off with, essentially, before we dive into numbers and stuff like that, what essentially this recommended budget, both on the amended side and for fiscal year 24, just again, from a higher level, there are no service reductions as it relates to current service. There is no deferral of maintenance. So whether it's on the capital asset side or even on the operating side, we're not deferring any maintenance. Our very robust maintenance management program moves on. This budget will support commitments that we've made to the Commonwealth, more specifically as it relates to transforming rail in Virginia. This budget will also continue to maintain both the safety and security of our operation at its highest level, which is important to us as well. This also supports across the different departmental elements of the budget. It supports all those departments' objectives as it relates, and that spans from community outreach. I mentioned safety and security. We're still enhancing some of our business processes as we roll out a new enterprise resource planning tool, customer service, community outreach, marketing, and all those different elements. So, and of course, human capital management as well. So we don't shortchange ourselves on any of that. That continues to advance, or we're able to continue to advance, and all of those things, of course, put together, of course, will support our efforts to continue to increase our ridership in the new fiscal year, but more specifically in the new calendar year. I failed to, when we were looking at total ridership, just to put things into perspective, we were sitting here from where we sit today versus where we were sitting last year at this time as it relates to ridership, we've doubled it. So we were just about 500,000 riders at the end of the calendar year last year, and now we're just now coming across or coming across a threshold of 1 million riders for the calendar year 22, and we still have service days left. So anyway, I see that Mark's had plenty of time to get set up there, but I just want to kind of, before we dive into the numbers and stuff, really, that's what we're proposing here is to do all those things as well. So with that, Madam Chair, Mr. Schofield, Chief Financial Officer of VRE, will bring it all home for us.
Thank you, Rich. Good morning, Madam Chair, board members. Actually, I will comment, it is very enjoyable to be an elf on the Santa trains, but the people that have to be the Santa Claus are really the heroes. If you watch them have to bend down and take pictures with all those kids, all while wearing this big fake stomach, it's a workout that is better than going to the gym. So they're the ones that really do the hard work. So we are hopefully approaching the end of our FY 2024 budget process. We came to you in July with our key issues. We came in September with the preliminary budget for your review. We've had some excellent discussions in October and November about some of the details of the budget. And this is the chance for us to present the recommended budget. If it is approved, then it will go to the commissions next month for their approval. I will hit a number of the highlights that are in the budget, and then I expect that we will have a robust discussion at the end. So we will leave plenty of time for that. We do have some additional information that we can bring up to support that discussion if we need to. So first, on the operating budget, the recommended budget, sorry, I guess I have control of that. Thank you. Our budgeted operating expenses for FY 24 are just under 109 million. That is an increase of a little over 11 million from the approved budget this year. However, 7.5 million of that total is the additional debt service that we have from the bond issuance that we did back in June. So the true sort of apples to apples increase is $3.7 million increase in our direct operating expenses. That is a 4% total increase. As we've talked about, a number of our contracts that are tied to inflation escalations are increasing substantially on the order of 5 to 8%. We have tried to mitigate that as much as we can by only increasing our direct operating costs or our departmental costs by 1%. We have really tried to take the knife to those, cut out the ones that we don't need, look for ways that if there are certain expenses that are in the operating budget that maybe we can move over to the capital budget, all of those things. I think we've had a very successful effort during the process to really try to control the things that we can control. Of course, the debt service that's in the operating budget that is supported either by the CROC or by our state and federal grants. Those direct expenses then that are the bulk of the budget, those are balanced by a number of different revenues, whether that is passenger fares, the jurisdictional contribution from you all, the state operating assistance that we get, as well as the access fee reimbursement that we get from VPRA, and of course then the pandemic relief money that is helping to backfill the lower ridership that we have. So leading into ridership and where we are now and where we anticipate that we'll be, as Rich just indicated, we have been seeing steady growth in ridership over the last 12 months. We are continuing to see a very wide variation across the employers in the region, working arrangements and how people are or are not returning to work, whether they're at the office, they're hybrid, they're totally remote still. All of that is continuing to evolve. And all of that, of course, is going to have a direct impact on commuting patterns and ultimately on VRE. We'll talk a little bit more at the end about the amended 23 budget, but our amended projection for fiscal 23 is 7,000 riders a day rather than the 8,000 that we had originally projected. So a little bit slower recovery than we had hoped. Coming off of that baseline then, we are still expecting an average of 10,000 riders a day over the course of fiscal 24. And again, we would expect that to be lower at the beginning of the year, higher at the end of the year. That would translate then into projected revenues of a little under $29 million. Again, we are continuing to see an evolution in the ticket buying behavior. Some people who are shifting to 10 trips rather than the monthlies. And again, as we have talked about, we are seeing changes in the average trip length, more longer trips, not as many near-in trips. And that has an impact on the revenues as well. That, of course, transitions right into the question of the survey that we did in November and how that translates into the proposed allocation of the jurisdictional contribution. I want to say thank you again to all the members of the commissions of PRTC and MVTC and all the VRE staff members who were out there doing the survey with us. It was a very successful survey. Our response from riders was in the 65% range or so we feel very confident about that data. After having processed all of that data, it confirmed what we had been observing in the field, which was that while overall ridership is down, it has been recovering more strongly in those longest distance trips, the trips out of Spotsylvania and Fredericksburg. And so what you see in the table at the bottom there is the share of riders from each of the jurisdictions. You'll see, for example, I think the biggest jump is Spotsylvania, going from 11% of riders up to 14%. And so those changes in the composition of ridership then translate into the allocation of the subsidy. So what we have as our recommended 24 subsidy is the $18.3 million value, again, returning to the subsidy amount that we had in fiscal 21. But of course, the allocation of that is quite different given the results from the survey. I think I'll leave that here for the moment, and we can come back to that as a part of the discussion there at the end. The other big question, of course, then is the pandemic relief. As we've talked about, the first tranche, the CARES Act, we have completely expended those funds. The PRISA, which was the number 2, we have been awarded that grant, but we are holding that one in reserve. We have not begun to draw on that one yet. And then the rescue plan, which has some sort of earlier deadlines as compared to CARES and PRISA. That's why we moved that one up to number 2 in the queue. We are currently drawing on those funds right now in fiscal 23, and the rescue plan would be the source that we would use for the pandemic relief in fiscal 24. So the budget is projecting the use of approximately $29 million worth of those rescue plan monies. And again, as we've talked about, this is really like a one-to-one kind of thing. If other revenues in the budget go up, pandemic relief goes down, or vice versa. So just to remind you, at the moment, we are projecting a relatively low number in the budget for state operating assistance, approximately $5 million based on the initial results of the TISDAC committee. But we are working cooperatively with DRPT, trying to find both a solution to that for the immediate year for fiscal 24, and then also a longer term one that acknowledges the differences that VRE has versus the rest of the transit agencies in the Commonwealth. So if we are able to come to a resolution on that brings the operating assistance up for 24, then the amount of the rescue plan money that we'll have to use goes down. The other way, of course, is, if the jurisdictional contribution comes down from that $18 million number, then of course the amount of the pandemic money that we have to use goes up by the same amount. That ties in then, of course, to the 6-year forecast. We had an excellent discussion of that at the committee last month. I appreciate everyone who was here for that. As you know, we hadn't done the forecast in a couple of years, just given the uncertainty of everything. But since we do seem to be coming into sort of a new normal, it was time to do the forecast. The point of doing the forecast is really to look not just at the year, the next year that's coming, look further ahead, demonstrate whether we have the sustainability that we need for the budget, and if there are potential issues, give us time to address them. I think the lessons that come out of this plan won't be surprising to anyone. The obvious number one issue is the return of the ridership and sort of how does that play with the runway that we have on the pandemic relief money. How long can we make those monies last while we're trying to draw the ridership back. But the other lessons also, I think, are not surprising. As we've talked about a number of times here, we do need to return, I think, in fiscal 25 to beginning to do regular fare increases. We do need consistent support from both the state level and the local jurisdictional level in order to be sustainable long-term. And, you know, this one we don't control, but we will need to see some moderation of inflation in order to keep our sort of overall costs at a manageable level. Shifting out of the operating budget over to the capital improvement program. Not a lot of change in sort of the individual projects that we have in the CIP. It's all the ones that we've been talking about in terms of our station improvements, our yards and maintenance facilities, the new rolling stock that we're bringing on. So the project list, which is included in there, is included in your materials, really hasn't changed very much. We have seen, as we've talked about, increases in costs due to the environment that we're in. So if you're looking at this table here, for example, that table on the far right, the unfunded number, that has increased relative to last year. The biggest one is still rolling stock, and that is really more of an out-year projection for adding rail cars and locomotives. That was in there last year. That one's not surprising. We're still in the process of, determining how we're gonna approach that project. But the increases are, in passenger station facilities, for example, or the maintenance and storage facilities, those are the result of, the inflation that we're seeing in the market. And those are some issues that we as a staff are gonna have to address over the coming 12 months in order to be able to move those projects out of the design and engineering phases that they're in, which we have the money for those early phases, but to bring those projects all the way to construction, we do still have some work to do. Just to highlight quickly on where we are with the commuter rail operating and capital fund. As you will see through the entire 6 years of this program, our annual $15 million is committed half and half, half to debt service and then half to the pay-go contributions that we'll be making to the VRE for those major capital projects that are part of TRV that are within the VRE service area. Right now, that is primarily Long Bridge. If you'll recall, those of you who've been here for a little while, prior to engaging with VPRA and having the funding agreement with them, we did program our first 3 years of CROC to the Crystal City project and the LaFont project. What this budget does include is a modest reprogramming of $4 million out of the LaFont project and over to the Track 22 component of the broader Washington Union Station rehab work that we are engaged in with Amtrak. As I think we talked about last month, Amtrak on this Track 22 project, which is critical for improving the capacity at the lower level of Union Station. They are bringing federal money to that project. For our contribution to the project, we need to bring a non-federal contribution, and the CROC is the natural place for us to do that. And finally, prior to the pandemic, I would say the amended budget process tended to be very technical. It was just sort of, oh yeah, we're going to tweak this up and tweak this down. But after the pandemic, with the challenges in terms of projecting ridership and how revenues have been moving around, this has become a little bit more substantial. So what we are recommending as part of the amended 23 budget, we are recognizing the very generous amount of state operating assistance that we got in fiscal 23 as a result of some of the additional revenues that were available at the state level. So that's a net increase of $13.5 million. We are showing a net reduction in passenger revenue of about $6 million. That is the result of a number of different things. One is that at the time we passed the budget, we didn't know we were going to be doing September fare free. So that has to come out. One is that we are seeing a little bit slower ridership growth, so recognizing that the ADR is a little bit lower, and also just the challenges in sort of projecting what the average fare per passenger will be. So we're sort of tweaking that down also. So altogether, reducing that projection by about 6 million. And then we are seeing, which is nice, I guess, we're seeing a significant improvement in the interest earnings on the the money that we have in the bank, essentially, just given the interest rate environment. So that combined then with a number of changes on the expense side, the most notable of which is increase in diesel fuel budget of almost $2 million. Even in the time since we have programmed this increase, we have seen some moderation in diesel fuel prices. So our hope is that we will not need that entire amount, but we do need to budget for it given the environment. And then a number of other changes related to more advertising, improvements in our cybersecurity posture, and a number of other sort of smaller areas within the budget. Take all of those things together. Ultimately, we are projecting to need about $5 million less of the pandemic money in 23 than we had originally projected, which ultimately is a good thing. That extends the runway on the pandemic relief a little bit further out in the future. I think I'll pause there. Happy to answer any sort of detailed questions on the expense or the revenue, or happy to sort of dive into the subsidy discussion. So thank you.
Yep. All right, we'll start with Mr. McLaughlin.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for that update. On the fleet expansion,
Yeah.
does that assume $0 from the FTA CIG program? For those who don't know, we have, VPRA is applying for funds from the FTA's CIG program for Long Bridge, 4-track, and also for, I think, 3 sets of trains.
That's right. Yeah.
So does that number assume 0?
No, I don't believe so. I can confirm.
Sorry, assume $0 from the FTA, or are you assuming money from, I'm just curious as to if you're assuming future federal funds from that program, or not?
I believe we are. I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood. Yes, there's still a big chunk of it that is not funded because it's a very sizable investment. But yes, there is a portion of it.
You got
that
my
is part of the
follow-up question.
CIG,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, thank you, appreciate that.
Yep.
Yeah, Supervisor Bailey.
Oh, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. The last statement you said, we like when you don't need all the money you need. We like that. Could you kind of delve into that a little bit for us?
Sure. The biggest change was that additional state operating assistance that we got. So
Okay.
both for fiscal 22 and 23, just because the revenue projections ended up being significantly better at the state level than they had originally anticipated. All the transit agencies, not just VRE, were able to get some additional state operating assistance that hadn't been planned for. So we were originally assuming that we would get about $11 million, which is in line with sort of historically where we've been. And the state came through with, I believe, about $24 million. So, and again, that's that sort of like 1-to-1. If we got more assistance from them, then we don't have to use as much of the pandemic.
Makes sense. But that was something we didn't expect, but it's not
Correct.
something that we should expect.
It is absolutely not something that we expect to continue. That was a sort of a one-time
Christmas.
windfall.
Christmas.
Windfall Christmas gift, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Right, thank you.
Sure.
Ms. Garvey.
Could you remind me, how long do we have to use the ARP funds?
No. It's like fiscal 28 or something like that.
Okay.
I can give you the exact date, but yes, it has very different rules than the jurisdictional monies.
That's great, because that's a nice.
Yes.
Ms. Mincing and then Ms. Bumpke.
Are you expecting the Amtrak step-up program to resume this fiscal year?
This fiscal year, I don't believe so. And so we had some small cut. That's a good catch on there. Yes. We have the way that the step-up program has worked in the past. It has been a net cost to us. And so not having it in place actually reduces our costs a little bit. We are working with the Commonwealth to maybe try to bring that back, because that's an easy way to bring additional capacity, but hopefully in a way that is more sort of revenue neutral for VRE.
Thank you.
Ms. Bumpke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mark, since we
received $13.5 million increase in state operating assistance this year, and that was from excess revenues at the state. I have two questions. What do we normally receive from the state for VRE for our annual budget?
Prior to those 2 years, 22 and 23 that had the excess revenues, it varies a little bit because the merit program is performance-based. And so depending on how much ridership you had or what your costs were in a previous year, the numbers move a little bit, but I would say in the range of $11 to $12 million a year.
Okay, and then was there anything that came out of the governor's budget yesterday that could impact us negatively or positively?
I have not had a chance to look closely at the budget yet. What we are working on right now is the work a couple months ago that TISDAC had done. Again, putting those performance measures back in place, and that having a relatively negative impact on VRE in terms of what we were expecting to get in fiscal '24. So as far as the total pie of operating assistance that's available to transit agencies, I haven't looked yet at the governor's budget to see how that might play out. But as far as the sort of methodology of how does that pie get, sort of divvied up and given to the agencies, right now, that is looking relatively negative for VRE. And so that's what I was referring to say we're trying to work with DRPT both on sort of a near term, can we fix that for '24? And a long term, could we get VRE out of that model because we're really that sort of square peg in a round hole of having a different way of doing business than all the bus agencies across the Commonwealth. Right,
okay. And then the 11 to 12 million that we typically receive from the state, I'm assuming that's all out of gas tax revenues?
It's out of the mass transit fund at the Commonwealth level. I can't speak to exactly what the composition of the fund is. I do think it has some gas taxes in it, but I think it has some other revenues in it as well.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair.
Supervisor Lawson?
Thanks. So can we go back to Mike's question related to that FTA grant and the Long Bridge? And I don't recall you throwing out a number, but.
So, Madam Chair, if I can provide a little example, little information. So the FTA has a program called Capital Investment Grant Process that helped fund the first phase of the Silver Line, for instance. It's probably the most detailed grant application. It takes a couple of years to get through the process. A lot of cost benefit analysis. We entered something called project development about a year ago. We have another year to get done with certain milestones. And then you might find out a year or two after that if you receive the grant. It can be for large sums. At a previous job, I received a grant for $956 million. The Maryland Purple Line, so these are $500 million to $1 billion type grants. We just won't know for a few years though, if we will receive a grant. So Long Bridge is the big one, obviously $2 billion. Alexandria Ford Track, $200 million. And it's for something called core capacity. When you add a third or fourth track, it's almost tailor made for us. And we're eligible. You're supposed to be at capacity, but IAGA bill allowed for a 10-year ramp up because of the pandemic. This was 3 years ago, we were already at capacity. That wasn't a concern, but a 10-year ramp up, and I've had conversations with Mark and others. And as you showed last month, we think within that 10-year timeframe, we'll be back at capacity. So it's good to plan now for what's coming in the future. So long-winded way of saying we're expecting somewhere between 600. So if we are successful, we would expect between 600 to 800 million. Congress and the USDOT typically fund up to 50% of the total project cost that's transit eligible. So this is a VRE focused grant. This is not for Amtrak. This is to help add trains in 2030. They'll come with the expansion of one. So sorry, it's a long-winded way, but we would need a whole hour to explain the FTA CIG program. It's very detailed. So, and for the new service you're adding, if we're adding some new train stops, which we'll be doing, those cars, the whole train sets are eligible for FTA funding. So that was my question to Mark.
On the rolling stock?
Yeah. So if we add 3 new train slots, that's eligible for FTA funding. The whole thing won't be funded 50%, just like I'm looking for funding for 50% for the Long Bridge.
Sure.
Looking for funding for 50%. It was just a question about, we don't know if we'll get this grant, and I wasn't sure, because he talked about a shortfall. And I wasn't sure if that shortfall, to answer my question, that it did assume we might get that grant. And if VRE ridership gets back to where it was, I'm confident we'll get that grant. This program's been around 30 years, and Congress has funded it in a bipartisan fashion.
So,
Thank you for allowing me to.
so just real quick, when the previous governor came out with this transforming rail, which was, I think, 2 years ago to that,
We
or.
announced it 3 years ago, and then we had signed it with the railroads and different
Okay.
timeframes.
Did that include a reliance or funding for that $2 billion project, or was that all, was Governor Northam, anticipating some type of Fed funding to help with that capital project? Could this be a new?
Well, inflation's hit us. And we need some extra funding.
Okay, so when he proposed that, because prior to that announcement, Long Bridge was something we just kept talking about as wish list. I was just curious if back then that this FTA grant was part of our calculations for funding the project.
It's such a long process. We assume $0 to be safe.
Okay, that's
And
my answer.
I'm glad we planned it that way because inflation's real. It's hitting our budget that will come out with a finance committee in a few days and then next month at a full board meeting. So, but we're still moving full stream ahead, and I'm fully confident Long Bridge will be fully funded.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you, ma'am. Just going into something means that was my answer too. So assuming $0 means that gives us permission to keep moving.
Yeah, we have to keep, it's design's fully funded. We'll be at 30% design in the spring on Long Ridge. We're gonna be putting out procurements for contractors for just final design and construction first half of next year.
Could you explain to me why it was 7,000 daily riders, but 10,000 daily average?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just don't I'm sure there's some really basic math that I should understand or definitions, but I don't.
So our original budget for this year that we adopted a year ago, we were projecting that we would, over the course of the year, we would carry 8,000 riders on average per day. And given the experience we've had up to this point, we're lowering that down to 7,000 riders over the course of the rest of this year. But we're still seeing growth and we're still anticipating
This
growth.
year, so it's 2 different years.
Yeah, we're amending this year down a little bit, but we're projecting continued growth into the following.
Apologies. I
No,
just
no,
don't
please.
get to work. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just add on? Oh, sorry.
Please.
Just to add on to what Mike was saying, and we are definitely a partner in doing that design and engineering for the Long Bridge. I mean, when I was talking about the money that we're contributing each year out of the E-Rock, that's exactly where that money is going.
Ms. Bumpy?
Yes, so, Mark, in looking at projections for next year, the 10,000 average per day, which, boy, I would love to see that happen, but could be a little optimistic. Where's the breakdown? Is that coming off the Manassas line? Is that coming, where's the breakdown of where you made those projections?
I don't have it on a specific station by station basis, but yes, I would, again, I would expect to see a more of a recovery in those shorter and intermediate trips that right now have been the slowest to recover. Whether that's coming out of Burke or, Manassas Park or some of those places. So yes, I would expect to slowly see us converging back towards the patterns that we used to have. I don't think we'll ever get back to it entirely.
Right.
But
So a follow-up question to that, and obviously we're down in Stafford and not in Northern Virginia. But what I continue to hear from people that are connected in Northern Virginia is that, you know, all these federal agencies have given, you know, the decision-making and have allowed those subsidiaries of the government to all make their own decisions as it relates to teleworking. And now you do not have to live in the what do you call it, the metro area of DC in order to be a federal government employee, and you can move wherever you want in the nation. I don't know about the world, but obviously you can be out in Idaho where you have good Wi-Fi and you can work out there remotely. And until they call you back, that's where people are gonna be. Is that an accurate statement?
I think that's an accurate statement, yes.
Okay, all right, so then I have to understand, how do you arrive at those projections? Is that based on growth that's around these different train stations or growth in all the jurisdictions where we're hoping to peel off, you know, additional bodies that are gonna be coming north? Because it just seems from what I see in Stafford that, you know, people just are not getting back on the train, that they're continuing to telework.
I'll give you my view, and then maybe Rich, if you want to give a view from
Okay.
the return to ridership
Thank
group. I would say it's three things, in my view. One, I think there are a lot of people out there who still don't even know that VRE exists. So I think that we're going to be doing marketing and advertising that we have not done in a long, long time. So I think that's one, including, you know, trying to get into some of the big employers like the Amazons in a way that we haven't done in the past. I think two is, you're right that some agencies have gone very remote, and some of those people are probably not going to come back, but I think we're going to see more of a return to office incrementally than we're at now. And three, I think, you know, anecdotally, at least, the experience on 95 is pretty awful. And I think you're going to see some people change their behavior because of that. You're right. I don't think we're going to, I think we're going to see a lot more people probably going in 2 and 3 days a week as compared to before, where they were going in 4 and 5 days a week. I'm not pretending that we're going to return to that, but I do think there are reasons to believe that the steady growth that we've seen over the last 12 months will continue into the next 12 months.
Okay.
Rich, I don't know if you want to.
No, I think he did a good job
think so.
answering it, yeah. So, you know, and it's no surprise to people in this room, because I've been talking about a reduction in subsidy this year. I wholeheartedly believe in the VRE mission. I think the VRE is a phenomenal organization, and I love the fact that we take these riders off the interstate. I think that's great. We polled our board the other night, and it was a 6-1 vote that our board wanted to see a reduction in the subsidy. We have at the local level, as I'm sure all of you do in this room, a tremendous number of other financial pressures in every department. I wouldn't say it's one over another. And obviously we have a lot of infrastructure needs. And so for me, as an elected official, I have a hard time paying a full subsidy when my ridership has been cut by 2/3. So where I used to subsidize at $1,500 a rider, at now, if we put in the full subsidy, it would be at $5,500 per rider. And, you know, I have a hard time standing I always make my test. I stand in an elementary school cafeteria and have to explain to 150 residents, and let's say 3 of them ride VRE and the rest don't. How do I justify making that payment out of, you know, our funds when we have $37 million that we have left over in fiscal year 29 based on, you know, and this was great. I appreciated this a lot. Because that the CARES Act, the CRISA, and the ARPA money was all there for this specific reason. So I need help understanding how I get there. Because as an elected official, I'm not there. I can't can't justify that to my people that I represent in Stafford County.
Madam Chair, when this is finished, I'd like to say something. Thank you.
Schofield? Oh, do you? I don't think that's. Yeah, that's important.
Well, I guess I was pointing to you in terms of explaining the numbers a little bit more, particularly some of the numbers mentioned. I think we need to have a discussion about kind of what the needs of VRE are moving forward. I've said this before that economically we are still in a pandemic. And if we start reducing costs now, I don't see how we help to move VRE forward. Obviously, we need the ridership, and that is slowly coming back. I mean, it looks like we're now over 1 million riders coming back, and we want to see that increase. But what I like to just talk a little bit more about are the actual numbers, particularly as it relates to the jurisdictional subsidies and how that helps to get to where we need to be in terms of full recovery. Because really at this point, that's the goal. We need to get towards full recovery. And while we're going to rely on ridership to do that, we know that we're going to need some help in other ways. So that's why I pointed to Schofield, but certainly, happy to open it up for a full discussion on this. Before I
Madam
ask, you,
Chair.
would you like to comment on that, Mr. Schofield?
No, I think I realize that I wear one hat as the VRE CFO, and you all wear a number of hats and have to balance a number of different things. My interest is in extending that runway for the pandemic money for as long as we can. And so if we reduce the subsidy now, we're just drawing the end of that runway closer.
Ms. Gary?
Yes, thank you so much. I just wanted to clarify something regarding our meeting the other day that was stated by Supervisor Baumke. The discussion ended with a decision by our board to allow us to, the board was polled ultimately to allow us to come back to this meeting and to better discern what we would like to do as the representatives for our county on the VRE board. So I just wanted to clarify that there was not some sort of overwhelming majority to reduce the subsidy. That's important information to have. I'm sorry I can't be there today. I contracted COVID, but I'm okay. Anyhow, thank you all. I just wanted to make that point of clarification.
Ms. Baumke?
So, Madam Chair, I think maybe Supervisor Carey and I respectfully disagree on that. While they did leave it up to us, we did do a straw poll, and I asked them very specifically, with the ridership being down, do you want to make a full subsidy? And the answer was no. They said, bring the numbers back to us, but there was, so I maybe we're saying the same thing, but maybe Ms. Gary and I need to go back to our board chair and listen to the minutes of the meeting, because I think we might be in a little disagreement.
Sure. Ms. Hayes?
So I just, if I could just wind back a little bit here so I get my head around the numbers. Am I understanding then the ridership number that we have for November 22 is done from one day? Okay, so one day only is
It's in accordance with the master agreement survey, it's a survey, so it's one day
okay.
and it's the AM service. So it's a survey that riders take during that period.
Is there any way for us to find out, I mean, from ticket sales, like where people originate and terminate to on the ridership?
Essentially, yes.
So if we took that data, would it be consistent with what this is? Meaning, is it pretty consistent? So the reason I'm asking that is in October of 2019, Spotsylvania's numbers was 1,079 and November 22 was 501. And although it is an increase in the overall ridership on that line, right? It's still at 50% relatively, speaking of what it was last year, right? Or no, I'm sorry, not last year, 3 years ago.
3 years.
Yeah, So we're still, and I get it, we're still kind of, bumping along, trying to get there. And we want to get there. So I just want to be clear that even though the percentage went up, we're still down, right, from what we were. And, I mean, the subsidy for us, the increase is significant. I mean, aside from Prince William County, we're the next one that's highest. And that is very difficult for us because we're in an environment right now that there's a lot of needs. And I know I hate to say that, but that's true. Now, you had mentioned, Mark, that we had needed 5 million less than what this year, right? Than what we thought. So my thinking, and I'm just gonna jump ahead here, is if we all wanna go back up to the $18.3 million in subsidy, why can't we apply, I mean, figuratively, that 5 million to the 13.5 that we were at, that was previous, and just stay at the 13.5? Does that make sense?
What year was the 13.5?
That was last year.
Last year.
This year.
I mean, I understand we want a bigger run or a longer runway and everything. And I would love to have a long runway on a lot of things, but unfortunately we don't.
So John's gonna bring up some hidden slides that we have in the presentation. So.
Hidden slides.
Yes. So while he's doing that, what we have here is a couple of different numbers, different total numbers at the bottom. And one of them actually is keeping it at the same level that we're at this year, the 13.5 million. But I will say the composition of that is still going to change pretty dramatically because of the survey. So even if the bottom line total is the same, incorporating the changing ridership patterns will still change how much each jurisdiction gets. So are we seeing? There we go. We keep the 13.5 million there in bold at the bottom the same, but we apply the results of the survey that we just did last month. Then we get the numbers there in the option B column. Yeah, I'm sorry, we can
Give you a second to.
So, oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Walkinshaw, then we'll come back to Ms. Hayes.
Can you go back to the slide showing from the budget presentation showing the subsidies at the full amount? I'm sorry. So for the FY24 recommended subsidy, and I think I know the answer to this, but it might be useful for all of us here. So Fairfax County's ridership as a percentage is 23%, but we would pay 31% of the subsidy. Can you or maybe Steve talk us why that is? We're paying, under this scenario, we're paying a lot more than our ridership, whereas other jurisdictions would be paying less than the ridership.
That's a very good question. So the way that the subsidy allocation works is we do a calculation of, we take the whole budget, we say, here's our total costs. And then how many of those costs are covered by things from outside, whether that's the state operating assistance, whether that's the pandemic relief, whatever. And we end up with a number that is our net cost, everything that is not covered by either passenger revenue or by the jurisdictional contribution. And those net costs get allocated according to your ridership. Then you get credit, each jurisdiction gets credit for an estimate of how much fare revenue their riders paid. So in your case, Mr. Walkinshaw, riders from Fairfax County are taking much shorter trips than riders from Spotsylvania County, let's say. So even if 100 riders rode from Fairfax and 100 riders rode from Spotsy, because of our distance-based fares, those riders from Fairfax would pay less. So you as a county get less credit against those net costs, and therefore the amount that you have to pay in the jurisdictional contribution is higher.
Thank you. Obviously, I probably wouldn't be the best person to go to that school cafeteria in Stafford. You're better at that than I am, I'm sure. A couple of thoughts, and I've shared some of this before. The master agreement and the subsidy in the master agreement is allocated based on ridership. But we're not paying based on ridership. We're paying for the service that's provided. So the stations that exist in our jurisdiction, the maintenance of those stations, the trains that show up on time, 90% of the time, we have not reduced the schedule of trains, the folks who maintain and the conductors of those trains, et cetera, all of that's still happening. So as jurisdictions, that's what we're paying for. I think if we had eliminated half of the routes that we're running, you obviously would have a very strong argument to make that why are we paying for trains that aren't running? But the trains are running, fewer people are riding them. I think the challenge with this, and I expressed this concern when we made the initial decision to reduce the subsidy, which I think on balance was the right thing to do at the time. It's a very hard thing to undo because it doesn't get easier year to year to year to go back to paying the full subsidy. And I don't think it will be easier next year for us to go to our jurisdictions and say, we need to go back to paying the full subsidy pursuant to the master agreement, especially if you set it up as we don't have the same ridership we had in 2019. Because next year, we won't have the same ridership as 2019. It will be higher than this year, but it won't be back to pre-pandemic. And the year after that, it won't be. And the year after that, it won't be. So, if I could predict this, I'd be a much wealthier man than I am. But I don't think our jurisdictional budgets are going to be in a better place next year than they are today as we're starting to look at our budgets that are coming up. So I also think, on our board, I chair a legislative committee, so I spend most of my time complaining about Richmond. I don't think when it comes to VRE and the Commonwealth's support for VRE that we have much to complain about from either Governor Northam's administration or Governor Youngkin's administration. On the operating side, maybe more importantly on the capital side, they are making huge commitments in the future of VRE. And on the TISDAC operating assistance debate, which is ongoing in Richmond, Mark feels it's maybe going in the wrong direction, and maybe that's the case, but that's an ongoing debate, and DRPT is advocating for us. I think it would be much more difficult for us to make that case to Richmond that we need their continued support to look at the operating assistance formula if we as jurisdictions aren't willing to go back to paying the full subsidies pursuant to the master agreement. So if you look at all of our funding partners, federal government, state government, they're all doing their part. And I think our job to ask them to continue to do that gets harder if we're not willing to do it. I'll also just say from an MVTC perspective, Supervisor Alcorn serves on the WMATA board. All of the WMATA jurisdictions, no one is talking about a reduction in the jurisdictional subsidy for Metro. In fact, we know that it's probably going in the other direction long term, that in order for transit systems like Metro and VRE to recover for the next 5 to 10 years, they're going to require additional jurisdictional support. And that's just a reality that I think we're living with. So, I think we need to bite the bullet this year. I recognize that it's difficult. I raised the point because we have the highest subsidy by rider. Our riders are taking shorter trips, but we have the highest subsidy per rider. But I think now is the time. It's just not going to be easier next year or the year after that to go back to paying the subsidy that's laid out in the master agreement.
Mr. Alcorn?
So I have to acknowledge and admit that the reason that 13.5 was our number last year is because I pushed it, with you all, and thank you for doing that. I think it did make sense last year to do that, and I've talked with a number of you about what we should do. when I was thinking about that last year, I was thinking about it as a taper, you know, that we would, you know, move back towards the full subsidy. And I think at this point, I'm supportive of moving back to full subsidy, but with a couple of conditions. Well, one is just an acknowledgement that, you know, you look at FY '21, it's full subsidy, but that is 3 years ago. We've actually had, so in current dollars, it actually is somewhat of a reduction, you know, if you take inflation into account. So it's sort of the full subsidy, at least, you know, the number's the same. The other thing is, I would be more comfortable using that federal money, not just for continuing to fill the deficit, the operating deficit that we have, but frankly, to maybe instead of reducing our subsidy, maybe what we need to do is have a very focused investment of that federal funds to make VRE, to get ridership back, to make VRE more robust, more resilient. What can be done basically with some of that federal money in a very dedicated way so that we actually, you know, when we get to that cliff and the money's gone from the feds, we'll be in benefit, you know, either, you know, I've done the marketing to get ridership or we'll have maybe invested in some things that would reduce our costs, you know, in the longer term. I think we've been doing, and I know you've done a lot of that already, but maybe to have a little more focused attention on that and maybe some metrics and so we can see how that investment, if you will, of federal funds can help us in the longer term. Because we are coming up on, it's a few years down the road, but we are coming up on that fiscal cliff. And I do worry that we're not gonna, you know, get the numbers back that we used to, and we've got to do something different. So thinking about this more as an investment rather than reducing our subsidy in other years would be my preference.
Supervisor Wiseman.
Thank you. So piggyback on that a little bit, Mark, you had mentioned earlier some marketing efforts that leadership is planning, right?
Yes, so we have some extra money in the amended 23 and then a higher budget in.
Okay, maybe it would be helpful to hear some more details about that. Because for the last 2 years, I have been expressing in my board meetings and here and at OmniRide, Bob will tell you, I've been expressing a long-term concern about transportation planning because the world has changed, the workforce has changed. A lot more people are choosing to work remotely when their employers allow it. A whole lot of employers are allowing it, private and public. I don't seem to be getting a strong sense of exactly when the different federal agencies are going to, if ever, require people to start showing up again. So I sit here, I still have a concern. I mean, if we're ever going to get back to pre-pandemic ridership, because of the reality of the world we're living in now. So if we're gonna ever reach those numbers, then we've got to change a mindset and an employer's culture, I guess, of requiring people to show up. Otherwise, or I know we've talked also about a different service, weekend service. So I agree with Meg. It's a tough explanation to the taxpayers. And those are some serious, like, and nobody in this room has the answers for the future, but we all know the reality that we're in right now.
Mr. Kelly and then Ms. Hayes.
Well, I'm sorry, I asked him about the marketing because Mr. Alcorn brought that up too. Can you give us an idea of what the plan is?
I'm probably not the best, I can probably tell you how much it'll cost, but I'm probably not the best person to tell you about the strategy. Rich, I don't know if you or someone else wants to talk a little bit about the marketing.
Well, just, and we'll do similar to what we did this previously or earlier this year at the beginning of the calendar year. We'll come back to you and give you a more expansive look at not just marketing, but community collaboration and those types of things. But it's, we've taken what we did earlier this year. And of course, all the things that we've done throughout the year, trying to get the lessons learned. Obviously, when you do campaigns like this, you end up spending, having some expenses that don't have a return, big bang for the buck, if you will. So we're reevaluating those, but there is an enhanced emphasis on marketing, and I can't say that without, community outreach, community collaboration, because that's where we get a lot of that from as well.
So
So
when you say community, you're referring also to employers, like,
Yes.
like Amazon and our
Absolutely.
large scale employers in the region.
Absolutely, yes. Let me just follow that too, but because another process we have going on in parallel is the effort to update our long-range plan, right? And so part of the amended budget addresses the fact that, we need to take a deeper dive into analytics and, not just current ridership behavior, but potential future ridership behavior, deeper than we ever have before. And of course, there's expenses to that. So we're doing all of that in parallel as we enter into the new calendar year.
Yeah.
And then just finally, as it relates to the federal worker, yes, it's still out there. It's very, very dynamic, number of days in the office versus telework and stuff like that. And just again, when we get into the very specific detail of communicating with those agencies, they'll remind you that we're still under a national health emergency. Okay, and a lot of those, that doesn't expire. The next one expires, I think, at the end of January, so of 2023. So if that gets extended, whether it doesn't, anyway, a lot of those localized plans hinge upon that as well. So we're still in a pandemic. As the chair said before, primarily economically, but even from this topic as well, we're still in a pandemic. So that's.
Mr. Kelly?
Ms. Maggie's been trying to get in there, so I'm gonna let her go first.
That's very kind of you. Are you sure?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I appreciate that. So I wanted to first just kind of respectfully, Ms. Baumke, just share like my experience about federal return to work. I don't think there's anybody who can remain wholly remote without like 2 days of pay period. People I know, it varies. I can't speak for all of them, but I don't think the general wholly remote is still out there. So I think like what you're alluding to, most people I know have a 2-day per pay period, requirement. That's not enough for us, obviously, but that sort of leads into, I think, what I'd love to enter into this conversation is not so much trying to change our historical customers' mindset about office work, but changing VRE's mindset about who their customer is. Like us trying to change the federal government, God bless it to anybody, but we can change our own mindset. And I think there were people who never worked from home and still aren't. And those are the people who we have not historically served. Somebody I keep thinking of amusingly is one of our Dash operators takes VRE to work every day, and I run into him all the time. It's become like this, like, where's Waldo of my life? I bump into him all the time. But like he never stopped coming to work the entire pandemic, and he will continue to come to work. And so in all this discussion, and I know we've talked about at MBTC, how do we get our historical customer to come back to the office? I think that might be a losing effort to some extent. Instead, who are the people that never stopped going in, and how do we get them to choose us? We can control that way more because that person's already coming in every day and never stopped doing that. So from a marketing perspective and like, how do we think about our future? I think, I would encourage us to think about changing our mindset rather than changing employer mindset and like who our customer is moving forward. And maybe it isn't someone who looks kind of like most of us in this room with, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday desk jobs. Maybe it is that Dash operator. Maybe it's somebody who works inside our administrative buildings, but because of the hours or because of the cost associated with VRE didn't use it. And so if we shift who we see as our customer, because we may have lost for good that 5-day-a-week federal worker, that's where the opportunities may arise. And if also we think about transit more as a public good, You know, I think about when you're talking about cost per rider, it also brought to mind for us, like we made dash fare free. DC is talking about making their bus fare free. Well, that obviously raises the cost per rider to a degree, but we're making a policy choice, right? We want people on those buses. We want to make them accessible. Now, we have the luxury, I think, of always being able to charge for our excellent product, right? And recognizing it has value. But this jurisdictional piece is where we're making a policy choice about transit as a public good, from an environmental impact, from a safety impact, all the, you know, getting people off of 95. And so, you know, recognizing my piece of the pie here and, you know, respecting the larger conversations y'all have to have, you know, I just keep coming back to what do we control? We control our mindset, we control who we seek out of the customer, and then we control the extent to which we see our service as a public good versus a cost per rider analysis. And yeah, so hopefully that doesn't sidetrack the conversation, but those were the notes I sort of made listening.
Mr. Kelly?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Looking at it from our perspective, or look on our general area, I'm going to try to come to a conclusion here and make a recommendation. As much as we've had this conversation about ridership and whether it's going up, whether it's going down, who's coming back, who's going forth. Right now, in our area, we're still the fastest growing region. We're one of the fastest growing regions in the Commonwealth. We've all, and I understand Prince William County had a wonderful conversation, now looking at some significant growth coming up. We are looking at still doubling our population within the next 15 or 20 years. Anybody's been on 95 and think that nobody's on the road, look again. It's bad and it's getting worse. We know, unless we get some extensions on 95, that what we just spent millions and millions of dollars doing the CD roads, extensions, et cetera, will be pretty much clogged up within 6 to 7 years after it's really up and running. So I do agree with the state that building more roads and stuff isn't the way to go. We need to look at transit as the main route. I just wish they would match those with the financial resources necessary to do it. That's part of the conversation. At the same time, I do understand, you know, the concerns that are being expressed here with regards to the subsidy and other issues that needs to be addressed. And I just remind everybody, in my time, this has been a very consensus oriented. In fact, it's one of the few consensus oriented organizations that I've been involved with in my time. And you know, we've always tried to address concerns. So I don't necessarily have an issue with if we can take what we saved, because it's not affecting the long-term plan we already had in place, and use that money to offset, if that's where we want to go. Because I remember when the state says, we're going to help you set up C-Rock, and I think I'm the only one in here when it happened, and kind of went, what? You're coming in and you're taking our money and reallocating it and saying you're part of the solution. Still don't quite understand that, but hey, whatever. But you know, transportation planning is, which has always driven me nuts in all my organizations, is because we're on our election cycles that we're on, it's long-term planning, yet we're totally in react mode, and we've been in react mode for 3 or 4 years. And that's not a good situation either. I really think it's time for a serious reset from the perspective of, and just sitting here listening, we're talking about how numbers are arrived at, how allocations of the funding is set up, what's going on with the state with regards to their funding, what's going on with transportation in the future, and how it's dealing with employees and et cetera, et cetera. You can't address those issues one meeting a month where you have an hour and a half to talk about it. Can't do it. A few years back, I can't remember when we did the last one, we had a full 1 or 2 day retreat as a board so we could have the state come in and say, here's what the situation is looking at long-term funding. VDOT coming in, this is what our long-term plans are. What are the projections for employment? What are the projections for growth? What are the projections of people going back to work or not going back to work? So we actually have the information available to relook at where we're at. And of course, the other issue is, and we have all agreed to this, that we need to change our emphasis on where VRE is going and who's it's picking up and who it's addressing. You know, for us in the South, it is still a critical piece. As much as we want to cut off our ties to Washington, D.C., it ain't happening anytime soon, at least not in my lifetime. So that's the reality we've got to deal with. But I don't have an issue with understanding the dynamic. And I've been the one that's been bitching the most, excuse me, the fact that because our gas tax money from the city, and I know Manassas Park are in the same situation we are, we got to take on everything, whereas the counties have VRE, excuse me, not VRE, but VDOT to help them with maintenance. We get little allocations, which never cost enough, and we've got to use this money. So when we lose like $50,000 to you guys, it's nothing. To us, it's a big deal. So I understand what Meg is saying, probably more than these smaller jurisdictions understand that more probably than anybody does. So any help appreciated. And if it's money that we can just reallocate and not change the dynamic, I think it's something to be considered. And it's something that we've tried to do. Everybody getting represented, being consensus builders. But I think it's more important if we go down that road, that it's time to really sit down and have a good 2-day, whatever it is, sit down and go through all these points that we keep bringing up meeting after meeting. And then try to put it all together and say, okay, is our long-term plan as we write it down make sense? What allocations and changes do we make? Because I think it's very important. And I talked to some of you in the meantime, we've kind of been a little flippant sometimes saying, we're not really going in the right direction. Is VRE going to survive? I don't want the public hearing that right now, frankly. This is too important. And we need to show that we are looking long-term and get out of this year-to-year look that we're doing and start coming back and saying, does 3-3 plan that we've used for years and years still applicable? Is the way we count numbers still applicable? Is the allocation still applicable? What changes do we have to make in it? I think it's time to have that reset, and now would be a good time to have it. So with that, I will shut up.
So I just want to go back to what I was initially saying, and that what I was advocating for is us to remain at the same level. For a lot of the reasons that Meg and Matt had indicated. And I'm not saying that we won't ever go back to the larger number, the 18.3. I'm requesting that you all consider that this is a huge increase for us. Our ridership still isn't where we want it to be. We hope to get it back up. Yes, FOTC is recovering more than the other jurisdictions, but it's still half of what it was. And I really feel it's only fair to give this one more year of the 13.5, and let us have another year of just seeing it. I'm not saying that next year it won't go up to 18.3, but I think we need another year of some kind of forgiveness on this.
Yeah, actually, Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, and I'll be quick because Arlington's in sort of an odd situation here. There may be, it seems to me, a way to be, don't keep it exactly the same. Don't go right here, something in the middle, possibly. And then it's interesting on NVTC with WMATA. WMATA's having similar discussions about how, because we're on a trend that can't be continued with funding as well. It's a different sort of thing, but it's actually, so both of these organizations are going through, I think, similar discussions. And I would just, I'm actually, this is my last meeting. Katie will be here next time, and it's been a pleasure working with everybody. But it seems to me that we're going through the same sort of thing, and that probably some sort of retreat or whatever at some point, a major discussion. But I would make sure you stay in touch with the folks that are talking about WMATA, because I think they're kind of related, and we're really trying to look at the future and where we're really headed. Probably a good vision would be helpful to have, but probably don't. I just keep taking it here. So I don't know if that's helpful at all, but I'm willing to.
Sure. We'll have the last few speakers, Ms. Bagley, Pomke, I believe, and then Mr. Walkinshaw.
Mine's really just a question. Could you just provide some historical context for how we decided, 4.7 to 13.5? Like was that number negotiated to, and might that provide us some guidance onto how we handle this year's discussion?
Sure. So starting with 18.3 and 21, the important thing to remember is that the contribution that the jurisdictions make is actually a combination of an operating contribution and a capital contribution. And so what we decided, and it in FY '22, it happened to be at that 13.5, 4.8 split. And so we said, okay, the jurisdictions will continue to make that $4.8 million capital contribution, and we'll roll the whole $13.5 million amount into the pandemic relief. It was just that those two numbers were kind of there as a part of the budget, and we said, okay, that's a logical way to make a decision on how much relief to give. And then in '23, when Mr. Alcorn suggested that we sort of taper back to the 18 number, we just sort of flip-flop those values.
So it wasn't.
Nothing more sophisticated than that.
Okay, appreciate that, thank you.
Ms. Bumpkin?
Yeah, so thank you. So I'll add on to what Libby and Supervisor Bagley said, and I appreciate that because I think you're right. We can't look at those federal government workers anymore. But one of the reasons that we've had them is because we're giving them a subsidy on our end, and they're getting a subsidy on the federal government end as well. So my question is, all those people that we think that we could bring into VRE, they're not necessarily getting that subsidy from their employers like the federal government has. So I tried to dig into this a little bit more, and I reached out to Steve yesterday because I had never really read the master agreement. And I read the master agreement and the nitty gritty is really on page 19 and 20. And for any of you that are new sitting around the table, the way I interpret it, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, we could have a decision here and there could be a vote to go with a certain amount of money. And if one jurisdiction decides, well, we're not paying that, what are the consequences to that jurisdiction? And the way I read it, you could reduce service to that jurisdiction if you so choose, but there's no we shall, it's all we may. There's no SHALL in the document that I could find. Is that kind of an accurate statement, Steve? And everything's subject to appropriation by every government body every year.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think that's essentially correct. And as I explained, you have to remember the nature of this document. I mean, it was certainly an organizational document to get VRE going as far as the governance goes, but it was also a funding document that underlay the debt issue that we were putting out. And we were demonstrating in this document how the revenue would be generated to pay the debt service. So, the advice of bond counsel and financial advisors, they're very strong about saying you don't want to put any details in here about how to unwind the service. You want all the jurisdictions demonstrating that they were 100% committed to funding their share of the costs. And it's subject to appropriation because many of you know it's structured as a moral obligation kind of revenue stream. There's an expectation that the jurisdictions would appropriate their share. It's not a legally binding one because it is subject to appropriation because otherwise it would violate the debt requirements that the counties and with some limited exceptions, the cities have. So that's why it's fairly soft on the unwind. The greatest incentive that everyone understood existed to get the jurisdictions to pay their share is that because moral obligation financing is fairly common in the Commonwealth, nobody wants to be the one that breaches that moral commitment because it could have a negative effect on their debt worthiness, their credit worthiness generally, because you don't want to have a report that, yes, we did have a moral obligation once and we didn't pay it. We didn't appropriate. So that was a strong sort of incentive to pay your share every year. The other simply was that there are consequences that with the Ops Board recommendation and the commissions could impose on a jurisdiction that did not appropriate their share. I mean, they could stop service to the stations and basically take any revenue that came from that jurisdiction as system revenue that offset the obligations of the other localities. I mean, there are different things that could be done, but they're not spelled out in the master agreement.
Thank you very much for Steve, for that description. And I think we need to be consistent here. You know, we're saying we're still in the middle of a health emergency, which we are until, when did you say, Rich? February, January, something?
Technically, the order ends January 31st, 2023.
Right. So based on that, we're still in the middle of it. And in my opinion, we should be using pandemic relief monies. And based on that, I make a motion to approve the subsidy that we have in this current fiscal year of 13.5 million. Second.
Okay, I think we actually had a few more people. Mr. Stork, did you still wanna?
Oh, I haven't seen any other hands
We have
up.
a motion on the floor now, but yeah, a couple more people.
Yeah, that's fine.
Mr. Stork, I'll just turn it over to you. We're in discussion period.
Thank you. There's been a number of really truly excellent points that have been made. I'm 2 years in on this board and I'm still learning a tremendous amount. And I know Matt continues to educate me about things that I'm not as well versed in, but two fit together. One of which is that I think we do need some sort of more in-depth look at where we are, where we're going. I think that's a given. It won't be in an hour and a half meeting. I also think that conversation needs to be when the road looks a little bit less opaque than it does today. So I don't think it's tomorrow that this conversation, but it clearly needs to be, I think, over the course of this year, because I think over the course of this year, we will know it will be less opaque than it is today, let's face it. And hopefully the federal government will be less opaque than where they're going. So I think that there's no doubt that over the course of this year, this is our year, I think, to make some longer term decisions. Whether they'll be the right decisions or not, 5 years from now, I don't think we'll know, but we clearly need to, I think, invest that time this year. There's a lot of issues with passengers, where they're coming from, in my mind, you know, obviously where they're coming in and where they're getting off, and more importantly, how that's changed over the last few years and how, frankly, it's going to change potentially over the next few years. I-95, we all know that there's some major improvements there, and for at least the first couple of years, that will probably make it a little bit easier and maybe make people less likely to use VRE. But we know that those changes are ultimately going to get back, if you will, into normal. And so all those elements, I'm very interested in understanding that. I'm very interested in doing a better multi-year projection, not only on ridership, but also dollars. So those are all things that I think are essential for us. And I think having a more in-depth conversation and getting staff to put together the materials that would allow us to do that, and others, the state, et cetera, I think are critical to that process. So I have really just one question that I want to kind of make a point that I think is an opportunity maybe to address this. The state subsidy for 2024 is dramatically less. But I also saw that the revised projection shows a significantly additional amount in state operating assistance. Can you just clarify why and what that might mean? So it's $5 million. Language you had in here was about $5 million.
Are you talking in the 6-year forecast then? Like,
no, I'm talking about for 2024, you had the state amount in your notes where state operating assistance is projected at $5 million, a decrease of $19.5 million from the actual amount received in 2023. And in 2023 revised, today at least you had it, the amount is $13.5 million over what we originally projected. Is that something that we should expect will happen again in 2024? Sometime during the course of 2024, we'll get additional state money, or do you think this in fact is it? The $5 million, a decrease of 19.5 million is what 2024 will be?
Sure. I think there are two things happening at the same time. That VRE and all the agencies across the Commonwealth received sort of windfall state operating assistance last year and this year. We would never expect to be at that level going forward. Now, what is our new sort of baseline level expectation going forward? Because TSDAC and the state are now not using historical numbers anymore, they're using current numbers to do the performance metrics. Our number then is dropping from, say, 11 or 12 down to 5. And so we're looking for both a near-term and a long-term answer to that problem.
So we're pretty much, the 5 million is likely to be what we get next year from the state.
I think that's the appropriate thing to budget at the moment because that's the best information we have. We are hopeful that in working with the state that we can get to a different result.
But the 13.5 million, that's the additional for this year was just likely to happen again, or?
Correct.
So no part of that, so no portion of that is likely to happen again.
Right. Mike, maybe you're comfortable with a little more of the details of what happens with the state level. But there were some very reduced revenue projections as a part of the pandemic that then ended up being surpassed. So there was a pot of money that was available to give to the transit agencies. We were one of the recipients of that. I don't expect that to ever be repeated.
That kind of sums up, all right. The other thing that I saw in here that's significant is that our we have a net reduction in ARP funds this year of $5.3 million. We projected $5.3 million of ARP funds to be used this year that we're now not projecting we need to use. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And the subsidy for this year is about $5 million different, right?
That's correct.
So if we kept the subsidies at the same, we really, in terms of our net position with our federal funds, having that as reserve really doesn't change from what we expected as of the beginning of 2023.
Compared to the budget we adopted a year ago, that's correct.
So the budget we're looking at for 2024 is going to have $5.3 million more in ARP funds potentially available than what we expected at the beginning of 2023.
Yes, so if we were to reduce the jurisdictional contribution in 24 by the amount that we're talking about here, then rather than the 29 million we're projecting, we would project to use 34. It would be that same $5 million, yes.
So basically I'm trying to get to make sure that I understand this right, that we would be essentially looking at the same amount of ARP funds being available, at the end of 2024 as at the end of 2023, if we reduce the jurisdictional subsidies.
Over the 2-year period, we would use the same amount, yes.
So I think that, given the number of things we don't know, frankly, the opaqueness of where we are, I think the ridership changes, I think that's a part of it as well. I don't know where they're gonna go, and that frankly it could be a great benefit, if you will argue that, because it reduces your subsidy for Fairfax County or Prince William or somebody else, or it could be frankly where we are today. So I think there's so many moving parts in this, and I think there's still so much that we don't know. I'm supportive of leaving the subsidies at the same based upon all that. I realize that potentially gives us less flexibility in the future, but what I just understand is that flexibility isn't any different than what we expected at the end of 2023 anyways. So that's kind of where I've gone with my listening and logic, and frankly, there's just too many unknowns for me. And I think the thing that I deeply worry about, and that's the reason why I was not originally supportive of reducing subsidies, is that I think next year's budgets for all of us could potentially be a lot harder. But I think there's so many unknowns in VRE and the fact that in the end, we're still in the net position of where we expect it to be. I think that's why I think it makes sense. So I'm just giving you my logic for where I am. Thank you.
Mr. Walkinshaw?
Thank you. I have a different view in terms of the thought process with uncertainty. I agree there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of the return to ridership, and that's why we need to be as conservative and prudent as possible in terms of extending our runway. I guess my question, if you want to keep the subsidy at 13.5 million because of the ridership numbers today and the situation today, question is, what would it take for you to support going back to the full subsidy? Would it take 12,000 riders or 14,000 riders or 19,000 riders? And I don't hear anyone able to answer that question. So my concern with not making a positive step this year is we're just pushing the problem and the challenge and the question and the conversation into next year and the year after that and the year after that. So that, and I really appreciate Mr. Kelly's reminder about the consensus-based nature of this organization. I want to be respectful of that. But I don't think we have a consensus to stay at 13.5. I'm going to go ahead and Ms. Bomke, maybe it's a friendly amendment or not, I propose an amendment to meet in the middle and increase the subsidy by $2.4 million net instead of $4.8 million net, which would take us to $16 million. I could support that. I think it's important we make a positive step and a signal to the operations board next year and the year after that, that we are committed to getting back to paying the full jurisdictional subsidies pursuant to the master agreement.
Is there a second?
Second.
So I suggested as a friendly
I have to respond, so I'll accept that friendly amendment.
Yes. Discussion on the friendly amendment. Ms. Matthews?
So you're bumping it up, and meeting in the middle, and I appreciate that. But even if we were to stay at the 3.5, 13.5, sorry, Spotsies would have already increased anyway because of the ridership thing.
The survey.
So now I'm still, right. So I would, I mean, it's already too late, but I would.
No, because you seconded the motion.
Yeah, they both would
You'd have to agree,
yeah.
you'd have to agree to the change.
Okay, well, I don't, but,
Well, then,
That can make it.
then your number's going up higher.
right, no, what I'm saying is my number with the 13.5 would have gone up anyway, right? What you're proposing is it's going up even more, right? So I was trying to say if we wanted to go with the 13.5 with the survey options in there, then that way my ridership, even though it's gone up, I'm still getting dinged on that somewhat. You know what I mean? I'm paying more than what we did last year.
Yeah, and that's a function of the master agreement.
Right, no, I
survey, and the membership of this operations board is based on that. So Fairfax County will be losing a seat because ours went down. I don't think we're in a position today to change the master agreement, but mathematically, yes, that's right. It would be a net increase. I think, for those of you who need to go back to your jurisdictions and reflect the concerns that folks have, I'm hopeful that you can make the argument that you were able to ensure that the increase wasn't as bad as it otherwise would have been had we stuck to the master agreement.
How much, but not as much.
Is
Do we have the figures of what that would be?
If we change the subsidy to 16 million even, have the numbers here, we could try to print them out, or I could just tell you what.
Yeah, just tell me.
So we're talking for Spotsylvania County. Get the right number here. 1,813,436.
Mr. Kelly?
I'm just trying to get a clarification where we're at, because both the motion and the second have to agree to the friendly amendment. And obviously.
I think she's crunching the numbers.
She's thinking about it.
Sorry.
Make sure we're at.
I'm just trying to figure this out. I apologize.
So you're paying about $3,000.
Yes, sir.
Just to keep muddying the waters, what the heck? Mr. Walker, you brought up a very good point. It makes more sense to base the decision on something happening, a positive or whatever else like that. I wouldn't have a problem if we looked at this more from the perspective of what is the ridership. If we hit the ridership number, then we continue on with subsidies. If we can consistently hit that number, we consistently on the understanding that the board would consistently do that. as opposed to, this is more of just, let's split the difference. If you want to make it on a positive and look at more of a long-term perspective, why don't we base it on a number and say, if we hit the 10,000 next year on the budget, then we go to full funding on the 10,000.
I mean, I think I would say that's not how the master agreement is structured. And as I said before, the subsidy funds the system and the trains to show up on time at our stations in our jurisdictions every day. And if we tie the subsidy to ridership, I think long-term, the risk is that creates a kind of downward spiral that we all wanna.
Well, what I'm talking about is basically do it for the next year. Obviously, we're still in a situation where I'm not talking about making this a policy long-term. I'm talking about the short-term to get it at least focused on if we increase next year and meet the 10,000 number, then we go back to the full subsidy. Just a 1 year thing, not a.
Right, if people are comfortable with that, I'm okay with that. I think the history of VRE, and others have been involved in it longer than me, but I've read about it, heard about it. There've been lean years, right, where ridership was low. And the system is so live today because in those lean years, jurisdictions kept their commitment to it, even though ridership was low from year to year. At that time, it was predominantly Fairfax and Prince William that were subsidizing it, but others have committed to that also. So I'm just cautious about connecting the subsidy too closely to ridership, because if we had done that historically, we might not all be here today.
Yeah, I actually want to get to Ms. Hayes because
Okay.
we do need to make a decision.
Yeah, that's fine. I accept that.
Okay, so we do have motion for a friendly amendment has been accepted by both. We are in the discussion phase. I'd like to call for a roll call vote, unless we think that there is general consensus here with no one opposing.
I think we need to vote because you have a motion on the floor, right?
Correct.
So, yeah.
So would you like to call for the roll call vote?
Yes. Mr. Alcorn?
Aye.
Ms. Bagley? Aye. Ms. Bailey? Aye. Ms. Baumke?
Aye.
Ms. Franklin?
Aye.
Ms. Gary?
Aye.
Ms. Garvey?
Aye.
Ms. Hayes?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Aye.
Ms. Lawson?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Ms. Bensing?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Stork?
Aye.
And Mr. Waukesha?
Aye.
Madam Chair, that's unanimous.
Mr. Walkinshaw, the great compromise.
Yeah, that's good. Very good, very good. So that was the underlying, we need this, that was it, right?
That was that for the original?
No, I was with you.
So we're good, right?
Yeah, we're good.
There's nothing else.
All right, yes.
And I just wanted to say, I'm glad you asked that question because I missed in the transition, so that was great. But also, can I just offer this also? Rick, if you could just give us a sense of, because I'm going back to something that when Mr. Kelly was talking about ridership. I think that though it has nothing, just a sense of comfort for my portion of this decision, we're trending in the right direction in terms of ridership. From what I'm seeing in the data, we are trending in the right direction.
So the simple answer is yes,
Okay.
but the trend, I think the discussion is, do we get back to, a level
Yeah.
that we've experienced pre-COVID? I think that gets back to what others have talked about is it's not gonna be based on the same market. It's not gonna be
Right.
from the same
Right.
sources. So that's,
Yeah.
there's different efforts that we will continue to capture those new markets.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, it is 10:54. So we'd like to move to item 9B, approval of the VRE Ops Board officers.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, can I just procedurally, very quickly? We will distribute a new version of the subsidy table with the total being 16 million exactly out so that you all can see those numbers. When the item comes before the commissions at the beginning of January, it will reflect those new numbers. And it will take us a little bit of time, but we will distribute a new version of the budget book that reflects this also. So thank you.
Mr. Dalton?
9B.
9B.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Real quickly, John, through that. So as a result of the results of the nominating committee, the recommendation for the 2023 VRE Operations Board officers were included as a blue sheet item in your packet, but they're up here on the board. Plus, I believe, Matt, Mr. Kelly, you were the self-appointed or consensus-based chair of the nominating committee. So if you have any comments there.
No, it's, the tradition is to step up on the ladder. We had the one opening because we had left it open. And again, I've been very vocal about making sure the FAMPO is represented on the executive committee, and Ms. Blomke has graciously accepted to do that. And I want to thank Mr. Smith for stepping up to the plate for the treasurer's position. I think it's a good group of officers. I think you've got to, based on the conversation we have now, that we have an executive committee that is, I think, would really probably work well together and really consider different ideas and coming to consensuses. So I think that's good. I think we need that now more than ever. So with that, I'll move the slate of officers as presented.
Second.
All right, motion made by Mr. Kelly, seconded by Ms. Wilson. Any discussion? I would like to say that certainly I think this is an excellent slate. Looking forward to the next term, and particularly working with Mr. Walkinshaw. I can tell you, as vice chair here, he has been excellent as he just demonstrated. So looking forward to next year, and thank you all on the nominating committee for working to put this together. With that, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
I'm assuming you are supporting Ms. Gary.
Yes, I said aye.
Okay, there we go. All right, now,
Chair,
yes.
I'm just on this point, and based on the discussion we had previously, and I think Matt's point about the importance of having some sort of retreat or advance or whatever you want to call it, but for the more in-depth review, I would ask our new officers to take that into consideration, the discussion we had, and if nothing else, poll the whole board about whether or not that's something they would support. But I, for one, would, as much as I don't want to spend a day, I know that I need to spend a day, urge that to be part of what they look at.
Madam Chair, for calendar year 2023, as a staff, we already have been putting together something, and Mr. Kelly alluded to a version of a retreat that we've done in years past or whatever. So just waiting for the new executive team, the new board to come in. We'll have discussions about that, set that, or make definitive plans, but you're spot on. We're right there with you as a staff.
I do want to point out for 9C and D that we can group these together. There's no objection. For C is the authorization to provide a letter of support for Amtrak's Chrissy Grant application for Crystal City VRE. And D is authorization to provide a letter of support for Prince William County's Permanent Transportation and Reconnecting Communities Grant application for the Northwood Bridge pedestrian bridge. And I'll just turn it over. There's no objection. Turn it over to Mr. Dalton to kind of go through both.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll ask if anybody has any questions.
Madam Chair, I'll move both.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion by Mr. Kelly, seconded by Supervisor Bailey. Any discussion? I'll just say, obviously, I represent the Northwood Bridge area, and we're making a lot of improvements there, particularly with regards to revitalization. This pedestrian bridge from where VRE is currently located will be tremendously helpful for a lot of the communities that not only already exist there, but that we're planning to build over the next 10 years. So hopefully we can have you all support for that. All in favor? Any opposed?
Aye.
We will now move into item 9E to recommend authorization to submit a VRE application to the I-395/95 commuter choice program.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, this is a recommendation to the commissions to submit an application for a list of not just operating enhancements, but some capital improvement enhancements. Been asked to just, a point of emphasis here is that the operations board action here is a recommendation to the commissions. And then, of course, subsequently seeking commission's approval for staff to submit the application. This is in no way the commission's, jumping ahead several steps and approving these projects. This is just about the application process. So with that, that's my summary, Madam Chair.
Is there a motion?
Move to approve, Madam Chair.
Moved by Supervisor Bailey. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Bagley. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We'll now move into information items. Our spending authority report.
Madam Chair, if, again, just 3 items on the spending authority report. If anybody has any questions, I can take them now.
All right. Then we will move into item 11, operation board members' time. So we'll start.
Sure, I usually pass, but just thank everyone for your confidence. Really look forward to working with the next executive committee, and just want to wish everyone Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Holidays.
I had an opportunity to be one of the Mrs. Clauses on the train, and it was amazing. And I just wanted,
You're showing us all up, but
it was but the staff just, it was so executed so beautifully, and the families and the faces, and it was just, and so many kids, I'd say, is this your first time on a train? And they would say, yeah. And you realize like you're making this really specific memory for families and for kids. And so I just, kudos to all the VRE staff and I'm glad it's back out there happening again. And it was great.
So thank you. I want to echo those comments, and I want to thank Chris. I don't see Chris here today, but he shepherded myself, my husband, and a family across the street that are 2 school teachers in Stafford County, and their 2 little kids that are 4 and 7. And as all the passengers were getting off the 8:30 train, the little 4-year-old kept saying, we have to get on the train. We have to get on the train. And Chris had said, stand back here while they all leave. And it was just really cute. And Mr. and Mrs. Claus were just phenomenal. And I sent Rich a text that evening with a picture that just said, thank you for everything. And yes, the Toys for Tots was really a bonus, and your staff was great. And Tony, who my son knows, the conductor, I sent him a picture and he said, oh my gosh, I see him periodically. He is always so bubbly, so enthusiastic, loves his job. And so there's a little shout out for Tony, who does a lot for the train. So thank you very much, and thank you for your confidence in me to step up.
Well, I'm looking forward to working with the new board. Congratulations to you. I love how we are a consensus board, and we strive at that for our communities, and it's a beautiful thing. So just want to say thank you for the opportunity, Madam Chair, to allow us to have those kinds of discussions, though they take time, but I think it's imperative that we do that. And so blessings to the holidays.
Thank you for the past 3 meetings. I know I'm super new, but I'm looking forward to the new year, starting the new year.
I just want to add the thank yous and the congratulations to staff for the Christmas train ride. It added to a wonderful weekend for us. It was a very successful Christmas season, if you will, from Friday on through. And what we're hearing from the public is that they very, very much appreciate it. And there's so much jealousy that some people didn't get there, which is encouraging, because next year we look forward to and so forth. And I just want to wish everyone safety and happiness during the holiday season. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and enjoy whatever tradition is your tradition, enjoy.
I just want to thank you, Madam Chair, for your time as chair. You did a great job. Sometimes difficult, challenging times that 2022 brought us. I look forward to working with Mr. Walkinshaw. I think today was saw you two talking and trying to work some things out. So I think it's a good sign of things to come. Continue with Matt has laid out a good operations board to be on.
Thank you.
3 years in a row calling you Madam Chair. I don't think they can get out of the habit, so. Thank you everyone for pardoning our dust while we do the rehab of the facility. We're also getting new furniture for our employees, who some of them have had furniture since like the 90s. So it's a very good holiday season for them too. Thank you all very much for supporting what you do for our Omni Ride. All silence.
Silence.
Happy holidays.
Thanks. Well, filling in for Kate Mattias from NVTC. This is my first time here, so nice meeting everyone and happy holidays.
Thank you.
And it's been a pleasure serving with all of you this past year and looking forward to the many challenges we have ahead of us. Enjoy your holidays. It's the most important thing we can do is just enjoy what the present is. And will always be a future of some sort, but enjoy the now.
Say happy holidays. Look forward to an interesting 2023.
And I echo happy holidays to everyone.
I'd like to thank Rich and VRE staff. I think you all are top-notch people. And Rich, last Friday, when I cleaned some tickets for a family, for friends who are struggling, you just came through. It was incredible. And it just really touched my heart. And for those of you that didn't know the little boy that I shared the photo of, he's a grandson of some friends of mine, and they're struggling with an untimely death in their family. And this was just something that really gave them some joy. And that's what the VRE staff does. And you're touching hearts that you don't even necessarily know about. So thank you so much. And thank you to the board for your leadership and or to the executive committee. And I really did enjoy that robust conversation today. And I thought it ended great. So thank you, James and Margaret.
Just want to say that I was going to thank Ms. Garvey again or congratulate her for her award, but then she stepped out. So call her and let her know that we did that. Just want to thank the Ops Board. I'll make some expansive comments in January, but it's been a great time serving as chair. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that when I officially step aside. But I just want to wish everyone a happy holidays. It's my favorite time of the year, so I'm looking forward to going home, and I hope you all have a wonderful holiday season. So with that, see you next year. Motion to adjourn. All right. All in favor? Any opposed?
Aye.
Well, congratulations.
We already had that part of the minutes done.
Yeah.
Happy New Year. Happy
Sign.
holidays to everyone.